Yeah, well, no, in his first definition, it was just that he kind of talked a little bit about the whole you've undergone a change in your heart type thing, but he kind of left out the parts that I think is important to being a Christian, and that's just basically, to want that fellowship with you, to get that relationship essentially. It's one thing just to say that you're not.
Not all Christians go for the relationship thing, no.
Incidentally, in the case of this hangout, any of the refugees from there are welcome. I don't know who else is potentially a refugee from that hangout.
Yeah, I posted the link.
If anyone wants to invite anyone else, just send them the link. I'm not doing standard invites this time because I'm not inviting my regulars right now.
Well, Nate, would you say that anybody to recognize themselves as a Christian has to have some type of relationship with God?
Yeah. Like I really, I think you gave the best definition of anyone, including myself. Can you recap that for us as best you can? Because whenever I read it in chat, I thought, wow, that's spot on.
Okay. To be a Christian means that you have undergone a change of your heart and soul. It means that you want to follow Christ, to desire Him, to have a fellowship with Him, and to bring glory to Him in your life.
I'm going to actually invite...
There you go. Sokka can be an honorary Christian.
I mean, this is the thing. It's interesting that you sit there with a bunch of people in a frickin' G-Man hangout of all things, and most of the atheists are sitting there giving a better portraying a better understanding of what a Christian is than he is.
I just think
I was sitting there in the sidebar talking with Nate, pulling out my hair, because my definition of it is more coherent, and I rejected that at the age of like 9.
Well, I've been using the definition of a Christian as to essentially have something with a relationship, to follow Christ, to have fellowship with Him, to be indwelt with Him, and to bring glory to Him in your life, because that is one of the I think it was Matt Slick that kind of gave that once, and I was like, you know what, that makes sense. I kind of like that. But Teddy brought on the part where it's just like that you've undergone a change in your heart to want to do the following, and I think, okay, that was a good part. I like that part. But at that point in time, I think that he stopped short of where he should have gone with the definition.
No, I said to Nate earlier, and I've said this numerous times, what I was raised to think of in terms of what a Christian is that there's only really ever been one Christian, and that was Jesus. Everyone else is just following that, trying to aspire to become closer to that mark, but it's an unachievable goal, is to try to be Christian.
Yes.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Opie Taylor just joined G-Man's Hangout.
Oh, boy.
Wow.
Can we watch that hangout in this hangout and comment on it?
We could actually. Actually, I can bring up the audio for it, and I can do a screen thing on it. Hang on a second, Lisa.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Do you see what Silly Pepper's doing in the other hangout?
No.
What?
He's playing G-Man and Jesus Flappy Bird.
Oh, boy.
Oh, that's awesome.
The pillars are Jesus, and the bird is G-Man.
Let me bring that up here.
Can you screen share?
Hang on a second. Let me see if I can find this here.
Here.
There we go. Bring it up.
Instead of playing it through my speakers, I can just turn it on stereo mix and get better sound quality.
Well, if you can do that, if yours can come out better than mine, if you can modulate the volume, because I do have some issues with that periodically. Because when I run it, it ends up something like this.
See, the Bible gives us a tip about it. It says that.
How's the volume on that?
Someone say, Lord, 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 I did this in your name.
Not good.
I did all these good deeds.
I don't know if it's
You could turn it up a bit more, then it would be equal to your own voice.
Okay, hang on a second. There we go.
People who believe that it's the things they do.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, Recklin's is good.
Rude awakening.
Well, Recklin, dude, wow. Okay, I'll mute mine then.
I'd like to welcome
And let me do a.
the relaxed atheist. Long time no speak, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing, G-Man?
There we go.
Hey, Rob.
I'm all right. I had to kick 2 people out of here because they just told me that they might follow rules and they don't like my.
I just want to watch.
I mean, when I go to somebody's hangout and they tell me
Yeah, that guy's pretty fun.
is either follow
Hey, my friend,
or don't get.
we're kind of spying in, so to speak, on the G-Man hangout and probably going to be throwing in some commentary.
Tuesday channel and tell him he can't cuss in his own room. Yeah, right. I got no power. That's his room. He can do what he wants.
Yes, but in your room, G-Man, you make everybody want to cuss.
But that's what I had to kick some people out. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
Galaxy, you there?
Like the refugee room.
This is great.
Yes.
Well, nobody can talk in there, and what we were saying earlier, I mean, everything that's being discussed in the sidebar is better than what's being discussed in the hangout.
Yes.
Okay. Do you do me a favor and think like a Christian for like 5 minutes?
Oh, wait.
You first, Jen.
So you were talking about the question he just asked. That person was coming in. No, I guess I did not. Sorry.
Okay, Neo, just real quick, just repeat what the question was again.
Oh,
I want to hear Galaxy answer it, the way she used to understand it. But go ahead, Neo.
Let me get help.
Hey, I love operating on hypotheticals here. Okay, Galaxy, I can play along with this one. So, why would it be against the will of God to count your tally of good deeds against bad deeds and actually keep account of the sins that you have done on earth? And how would that disqualify you from being a Christian?
All right, go ahead, Galaxy.
Make you an accountant.
Nate, can I ask you a question though?
Yeah.
Looking at the the
keep
G-Man
hard for a
playlist, how much of the videos you think you put out there glorify God?
I guess.
You know, I don't know what G-Man's playlist looks like.
I think he spends a lot of time glorifying himself.
Yeah, well, from what I do know, I mean, it seems lots of things like I'm calling out this person, or I'm calling out that person, or this person's a liar. So, in regard to that, I'd say not very many that I'm aware of personally, but I don't know. I haven't seen the actual channel.
I don't know. That was probably the one point that I wanted to bring up, but then like halfway through, I'm like, what's the point?
I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, all the arguments he's made have historically kind of fallen flat on their face. There was a hangout in a while ago, and this was the hangout that I met Gretchen as a squirrel in. And Gretchen's great. But she was in there, and a couple other folks were in there, and G-Man was just laying into her, telling her she's not a true Christian, and this and that, and I popped in there because I was pissed. It's like, you know, here's a person, their first time in the hangout, they do happen to be a believer, they are a Christian, granted, of course, G-Man says you're Catholic, you're not Christian. Whatever, piss off. So I went in there to basically tell him to shut the fuck up and play nice because, you know, this is her first hangout. Don't be a jerk to her right off the bat. We have somebody new in the community. Don't be a jerk. And he's like, oh, but the Bible says we can know how to tell true Christian. And I'm, for fuck's sake. And he's like, read such and such, read such and such. So I'm like, okay, fine. So being the asshole that I am, I opened up my lovely little Greek translation of it, direct translation from the Greek. And I read that out, and he got all pissy about that. And I said, well, don't you care about the Greek? He's like, no, I don't care what the Greek says. I'm like, I didn't think so. And then it goes on from there, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll read it. So I read the 3 verses. And the first one says, basically, you can know how to recognize whether somebody is a follower of Christ or not. The second line says that the person professes that Christ lived and died on the cross. Next one says if they deny that Jesus lived, then they're not a Christian. Well, none of these people are denying that Jesus lived. Sorry, your argument, your biblical argument in those verses do not support your statement. And then, of course, after this is pointed out to him, he's dismissing this second and third verse and saying, but the first one says we can tell who's Christian. I'm like, you fucking retard. Then it tells you how. These people meet that criteria. Piss off. But he doesn't care what that book says. He just cares about his arguments.
Yeah. Well, I think there were so many fail points in that. Like, this is like, I don't know, this is like theology. Is there something less than 101? Because, you know, it's like, this, I felt, where it was going, isn't even in interpretation differences territory. Like, no. It's not even that far. This is like actual black and white, that if everyone sits down and has like a 20-minute study, everyone should agree on some of these foundational points, but they're arguing. So it's like, you know, people will be like, you know, just stuff that I remember hearing in like middle school.
That's kind of the punchline, is that the atheists are, you know, we can state these foundational points too. We understand that part, you know, and he doesn't. And that's kind of sad.
Some of us do.
But it's like one of the last examples when I left was, so you're saying that if you call yourself a Christian and you go do something bad, you're going to say you never do that and you're not a real Christian. I'm like, no, that has nothing to do with it. Like, come on, even if you don't believe God or whatever, you can at least get this whole, you know, Christian theology basics right. You can disagree with it, but you can at least understand how it's taught in like traditional, Christianity.
And by the way, I do accept that correction. Yeah, I should be saying some atheists. A lot of atheists that are willing to go in there and talk on a theological basis with these people, we at least get the premises. And the sad part is we seem to get it better than G-Man, who claims to have his own ministry and makes all these claims about basically being the only Christian in the world.
So how does Roman Catholicism change that the definition of what a Christian is that I've given out, and that even that G-Man and Teddy gave out, that a Roman Catholic isn't considered a Christian?
Well, the thing is, the problem is what they do is they look at Catholicism as being this thing that's somehow different, and they try to claim that, they worship the Pope, which they don't, and they worship the Mother Mary, which they don't. They venerate the Mother Mary. The Pope is the highest church official. He's considered to be, God's representative on earth. Not like Jesus, not divine. He's, just the person with the God phone. That's kind of how it's presented, more so than anything else. Now, this is just their specific church doctrine. This isn't even theology. This is doctrinal differences. Now, the veneration of Mary and showing great respect for the Mother of God, okay, great. That's like me respecting your mother for the role she played in your life or something along those lines. This isn't worship, but they try to claim, oh, they worship Mary. No, it's really a gross misrepresentation of those beliefs is what these people are fighting against. And he'll get Catholics in the room, and they'll sit there and tell them, that's not what we believe. That's not how we look at it. No. When it comes to this, and they'll try and break it down and explain it to him, and he'll laugh and argue with them and tell them that that's not what they believe.
But then he doesn't like it when atheists tell him what they think he believes. Funny there.
I mean, it's just ludicrous. It really is. It's a shame, frankly. Now, there was a brief time period, around about a year ago, that he was starting to get a little bit better. And I had hope for the boy. And I'm sitting there, frankly, one of the things that I did when I came to YouTube is I was hoping to find what I refer to as a worthy adversary. Somebody that I can sit there, get in discussion with, go toe-to-toe with, and have a reasonable theological discussion. For a little while, I was thinking, well, G-Man's a little bit pliable, and he has all this passion. Maybe he could be groomed a little. No, that didn't work. Then Nate came along, and I'm like, good, I'm done. Take that as a compliment it's meant as, Nate. Because Nate and I, we can go back and forth for hours, and we don't need to resort to name-calling or you're evil or any of this other crap. We can have a good conversation. And that is so freaking rare here. And incidentally, Shamos, you're right. Neo doesn't understand the doctrine much of anything, frankly. I've had issue with him in the past. He annoys me.
Right. Yeah, I think it's pretty common, and I don't think it's intentionally. I don't think they're intentionally overstepping the doctrine of grace. I just don't think they're very familiar with it. So I think that when you look at Christianity on the surface level from an outside perspective, it does kind of look like a tally chart type of deal, like he was saying. But I mean, if you look into the doctrine, especially we are saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, not by works, so that no man shall boast. It's pretty.
Yeah. I mean, the whole notion of keeping a tally of your rights and wrongs and this kind of stuff, that's not for a person to do according to the scripture and what have you. That's God's job. And if you're doing that, then you're sitting there trying to play accountant to get your way in, and that's not the way it's meant to be. You're supposed to do good for good's sake, and not because you're trying to get some kind of favor, or that you're trying to balance out the ill that you've done or something. It's not supposed to be accounting.
Right. There is no balance. For example, I get often asked a lot of times by atheists, hypothetical type questions, like, what if Hitler were to truly accept Christ on his deathbed, right? And I mean I like to answer with the good thief reference in the Bible, where this guy was condemned to die on a cross next to Jesus Christ, and I mean he's a horrible person. He's committed so many crimes. His bad definitely outweighed his good. I mean, he was condemned to death, and Jesus saved him. He said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said, "Verily I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." So it seems that if that guy had faith in Jesus Christ, which is why we obtain grace, it doesn't matter. His tally chart was way in the red,
I mean, one of the notions that you have within Christian doctrine. Now, mind you, I'm an atheist. I'm one of those horrible people, and I say that, of course, in jest. But one of the doctrines that they have is forgiveness. This notion of God not being simply just, but forgiving, and this and that. And if you were to try and relate this character as being some kind of father figure, what kind of father is going to sit there and lock a kid in the basement and torture them for eternity? That's where it kind of doesn't work. So it's, even if you were going to go with that, I mean, the people that say that, well, yeah, hell's real, but nobody's actually there, I can kind of get alongside with that to a degree. You know, because that makes more sense than this idea of these people being tortured forever. This seems to be the, so to speak, punishment, the thing that we want for all those people that we don't like, you know, so it almost seems a little bit of that. And if you really go through and get back to the basics of the core beliefs that these grew out of, hell didn't become a literal place until the Hellenistic tradition started creeping in. And that's when you started having the anthropomorphization of this evil character. And Hasatan becoming the evil opponent of God that God, for some weird reason, lets function anyway. You started getting all these weird doctrines brought in, which then got brought forward to the Middle Ages. You start getting all this, what I refer to as Christian fan fiction, whether it's something like Dante's Inferno or what have you, that all these additional things started being introduced that became popularized and in a lot of cases became doctrine. And there's a really weird line as to where, you know, the doctrine has been
cutting out pretty bad.
Where the doctrine has been modified over time, and what the true teachings might have been, that you can't really know. And this is why there's going to be so much division there. And there's a point at which sitting there and bringing up these things just as arguments to try and, you know, make somebody sound bad or make a belief system sound bad just kind of sounds like bullshit to me after a point.
Right. I'll kind of have to agree with you there in a sense. From the Judeo tradition on into the Christian tradition, you know, the idea of hell has progressed, and you know, the theological Christian is going to tell you that it's progressive revelation, which is what I hold to. But what the beauty of it is that through this progressive revelation and through the different translations and kind of how hell has been imagined, there's a lot of different ways you can interpret that. That's why I don't like the people that say this is it, this is how it's going to be. You know, I think that it's even open enough to the semi-universalist tendency. There is no definites, and I think that's a beauty and a blessing.
Yeah,
Shevdal, can I speak as a universalist?
No, you can't. Go ahead.
The thing is that if you read the Bible, it is very clear that there is universal salvation there. The problem is that people, because people are in the mindset of tribalism, they want to say, well, it's this group here that doesn't get to go in, and this group there. And the thing is that when you introduce people into that, that's where you get problems. I mean, this is the reason why we have people like the Calvinists and their ideas.
Gary, before you go too far, I'm going to have to call you out on that, as Recklin is already referencing on the sidebar. The notion of stating that this is very clear based on the scripture. Well, how clear can you truly say something is when there is so much disagreement on such things? It may be very clear to some, will not be very clear to others, and simply stating that it's a matter of tribalism, I don't know I can agree with that either.
I don't know. I mean, I think with some problem is that some people's heart kind of fears the description of the actions, that the intuition differentiates into this intrinsic fulfillment of the quantum state.
Hi, how you doing, Deepak?
Sorry, I gotta go clean the house, guys.
Take care, Sokka.
By the way, did you see me and Seth drop the Deepak in there?
Yeah, I saw you pull that out. That was fun. You only got about 4 or 5 lines in before he started getting Nancy, but it was fun.
Yeah. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.
There should be.
See you tonight, Shuffle, man. We're doing Deepak tonight at Shuffle.
All right.
Shadow, I'm gonna code an JavaScript thing for a Deepak generator. You just put in some words and it makes some Deepak around it.
So we can actually have keywords in there.
Here's what I'd say. It's very clear if you read all of it. If you don't just read the parts that agree with you. If you read the whole New Testament, it's very clear that universal salvation is what Jesus Christ is offering.
How many serious theologians have done just that and come to contrary opinions?
No, I'm not saying they're being dishonest. I'm just saying that what they've done is that they'll take passages from Mark and then they'll twist it to say how it agrees with passages from Luke, for example, instead of just.
So you're not saying that they're what you're saying is that they're biased and they're
No, I'm not saying they're biased. It's like, for example, if someone wanted to say it's the way that certain people read, let's say, for example, Charles Darwin, and say that he's a racist. No, he isn't. But again, they'll twist his words to make him seem like that. It's the same sort of thing that's going on here. Is that people will twist the Bible?
I don't think that's it. And I'll tell you exactly why. Now, realistically, when you go through the Bible, and let's, for the moment, throw out all the English translations. Let's even throw out the Latin Vulgate, which is a Latin translation that was from other translations. The Latin Vulgate wasn't truly back to the early Greek itself. But if you go back to the way that things are presented in, for example, the Codex Sinaiticus, which is one of the earliest versions of the Bible we have, a lot of the wording there is very different when you go through it. But when you go through the very different translation models, there are various passages, like the one, for example, and I love referencing this one, in Galatians, where it says, even if an angel from heaven preaches a gospel unto you other than the one that we have preached unto you, then let it be an anathema. Now, the way that this is normally portrayed in the English text is, if anyone presents a gospel to you other than that which we have, meaning, like Paul and his followers, then let it be an anathema. But when you go back to the Greek, that's not necessarily what it's saying. Some translation models do hold to that, but other translation models, what it's really saying there is that if somebody brings you a gospel other than that which you have accepted, now, it doesn't mean this person's teachings or that person's, but it's saying that the text should be speaking directly to you. And the message that you receive is personal to you, and it's going to be, so to speak, tailored to you. It's going to be based on your own understanding, regardless of what the preachers say, regardless of what anyone says. There's this core to it, but more so, everything outside of that core, which is what Nate usually speaks to, is, that's entirely up to you to decide what feels right to you and what doesn't, but the core of it remains the same.
Okay. Again, I don't disagree with that.
But saying this is how you get to salvation, that's how you get to salvation, this is what hell's like, that's what hell's like. Is the devil a literal being, or is this just, a representation of that which in us which has the tendency to do negative things? That doesn't matter either. You have this core part that, well, Nate, go ahead, say your lines.
As Sokka said, yeah, if you believe there's a God, believe the narrative of Jesus, believe his claims, and want to be saved, congratulations, you've won at life.
But anything outside of that is all just doctrinal. And most of Paul, for that matter, in and of itself is just doctrinal stuff, how to run the church, this kind of stuff. That's the majority of it. Now, there's other things that, he advises you to believe, this or that. There's a lot of rhetoric in there. There's a lot of him just trying to get people hyped up. For example, the majority of Romans is really just hyperbole, more so than anything else. He's sitting there talking to a specific community in a specific place in a specific time that has specific problems, dealing with some of that and trying to get the people excited at the same time. Now, people will latch onto one small part of that and say, haha, this means, no, he's talking to this people. A lot of this you can't really take outside of that.
That's wrong, Shadow. Well, I hear a lot of secular people will say that, well, we know that the epistle to Romans is written to a small church, so its message is really not meant for the larger meaning for all Christians, right? It's just meant for this one church at this one time, which is absolutely wrong, right? Because anytime he shares part of the message of Christ or part of the doctrine, he wants these people to set these people straight and then set anyone else they know straight. So when he sends...
I have a linguist you could talk to about that.
No, but listen though, hold on for a second. Let me explain something to you. When he says, like Jesus says on the Great Commission, go out and tell all peoples, right? So he doesn't say, I'm sharing with you something important about the Lord, the letter of Romans, which has a lot of doctrinal stuff in there, and then I want you to keep a secret. No, you're supposed to spread it out through all Christians. I agree with you. The letter was written to one church, but the information contained therein was vital to all Christians. Any Christian that any of those Romans come in contact with that was having a dispute similar to the ones before the letter was written, they could correct them and say, no, look here, brother. And it's not meant for them to just, they see a wrong going on. Like, there's so many doctrinal beliefs in Romans. For example, the fact that we're not under the law anymore. So, for example, if I were in the Roman church back then and I've been exposed to the letter of Paul and I see a guy over here that's preaching a works righteous salvation, it seems to me, I mean, not a works righteous salvation, preaching that they're under the law still, it seems to me it's my obligation to go and correct that brother. So to say that it's an isolated...
Wait, hang on, wait. No. That person that you are, quote-unquote, correcting, the person that he's saying is still under the law, is that person a Jew or a Gentile?
No, if he's a professing believer in Christ...
He can be a Jew and still a professing believer in Christ.
Yeah,
now, if you actually go to... If you go to
Jews
Galatians, I believe...
under the law.
In Galatians and some of the other books, it states that the people that are Jewish are still under the law. It's those that are not Jewish that aren't.
You cannot be Jewish and accept Christ.
Yeah,
no,
so
you can be Jewish, and there are Jews that accept
Messianic
Christ.
Jews, right? But they're not...
I'm talking Jews for Jesus.
Yeah, they're known as Messianic Jews.
You do know that the early Christians, Shambles, the early Christians were Jews, right?
Actually, a lot of them are Gentiles. Now, if we take, for example, the church in Rome, at that time, what was going on is there was a major conflict going on between the two predominant communities, both Jew and Gentile, each one claiming to be, so to speak, the true Christians, the ones that, quote, quote, knew God better, or to be more righteous.
Yeah.
And they were sitting there trying to measure their what they consider to be their righteousness or their rightness with God as being greater than that of the others. Now, each one was claiming that the Jews were claiming they really knew God, and the Gentiles were claiming, no, we really know God. And the letter says, no, we all know. And when he says we all know God, what he's talking about is everyone within that church community. That isn't a universal everyone outside of that, which is something I attempted to not only point out to some of the people that are doing the whole precept argument, but I also got both a number of people that have been through seminary as well as a Greek linguist to actually go and get their take on it as well, and yeah, that's the case. There's also a lot of linguistic markers in there showing that this was time and place specific as well.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that I'm talking before the Church of Rome. I'm talking like Nero times, like before that, like which were a small minority of the Roman Jewish population. We're talking about like 50 AD here. We're not talking like 100 AD or whatever.
Well, even in the earlier days of the church, they actually did have higher Gentile conversion rates than Jewish conversion rates.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that the early Christians were Jews mostly, and then he became more Gentile populated.
You're saying the early ones were more Jews, but I don't know that that's necessarily supported. We don't really have any statistics as to the conversion rates early on. We do know that once they started getting more of a tally of who was and wasn't, so to speak, once basically they started trying to exterminate these people, there was a rather substantial Gentile population. That much we do know. We also know after the destruction of the temple, what Jewish population there might have been would have dropped significantly at that point.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I'm just talking about before the destruction of the second temple. That's all I'm talking about.
So you're talking before, what was it, 68, 70-ish, somewhere around there?
Yeah, so around that time, around the time of Nero, when he decided to blame the Christians for the burying of Rome.
Yeah,
I'm talking about that period.
But prior to that, we really don't have an idea of what portion either way. So that's just making sure we're representing that fairly. I'm sorry, I've gone off track here.
That's fine. I know he said the dead away. Demons is decided to call it, apparently.
Anyway, Seamus.
Let me just say this. I posted a side there on Messianic Judaism, right? Mm-hmm. I'm pretty familiar with the movement, and it says right there in the second paragraph of the article It says, salvation in most forms of Messianic Judaism is achieved only through the acceptance of the Christ as one Savior. Second sentence, it is believed that all sin has been atoned for by Jesus' death and resurrection. Any Jewish laws or custom that are followed are cultural and do not contribute to salvation. So,
okay.
Okay, and another thing. So,
Thank you for the correction, by the way.
Sure, sure. And another thing, I really take a lot of issue when someone tells me that the message into the letter of Romans should not be applied to all Christians. So, like, I can't use that theology to instruct an atheist or anyone else on how we view Christian theology. And I take a lot of issue with that, right? Because that issue is written by the Apostle Paul, right?
Well, hang on. Please, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. Because I think that's important. And a lot of the time when I get into things like this, a lot of people will go to that, and I'm not sure whether it's my presentation, which it may be or it may not be, but a lot of the messages in there are being written to specific churches to address specific issues. And a lot of what I find to be the modern theology doesn't take into consideration the why behind this, what was going on at the time, what is this really saying? And I think that taking out the cultural context of the time, the why it was written, so to speak, really diminishes the message that's being sent, and it allows for people more easily to go through and take sections out of context to apply them things that they may have not have been really meant to be applied to. And from this point, you can go on and keep criticizing. I just want to make sure you get where I'm really going with that.
I couldn't get out a lot of it. You were kind of breaking up. Maybe if you could repeat it or try to wiggle your mic cord or something.
Yeah, let me try and hold up my bandwidth. I've been having issues apparently today with this. Give me a second. I'm using a new headset. The headset should be fine. I don't know. I took it off the other one. Basically, to put it in a nutshell and to be a little bit less eloquent than I was attempting to be a moment ago, if you take the message of some of these letters out of the context of why they were written, I think a lot of the meaning is lost. And I think that a lot of modern Christianity does just that and disregards why was this written, what was going on at the time, what was the message that was trying to be conveyed, why did he consider it important enough to write this letter. Once you take some of that out, a lot of it just becomes words out of context. And I think that more or less sums up what my comment is pertaining to that, is that once you take it out of that context, a great amount of the meaning is lost.
Sure. I think that what I can say to that is that Christians that are familiar with a little bit of, not all Christians who are reading that are going to know immediately the actual surrounding information or the context or why it was written, who it was written to, when it was written to, and what problems it was to address, right? But so I'm blessed enough to know just a little bit about this. And I'm not very scholarly in this endeavor, but I'm knowledgeable enough to know that this was a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the early Roman church, the early Christian community there, and it was to address specific issues, right? Specific issues within that community, right? And it seems to me there's multiple issues that he's addressing, but one of the overtones of the epistle to Romans has to do with the law, right? And you can find that in anywhere from the start at I think it starts at chapter 6 and then resonates all the way to chapter 11 of that book. And the first book starts out with saying that no man is without excuse, for all know God has revealed himself. So that's specifically speaking to the Gentiles, and then it progresses more into, like I said, talking about the law. And I realize this. I totally do. And I think that oftentimes, like you said, some Christians may not be familiar with this historical aspect. But what I claim to hold in addition to this knowledge is that the Apostle Paul was instructing this information for this community, but it was also intended to all peoples as a message for how he thought on the theological doctrines and views of how Christianity should be and how it was revealed to him as an apostle. So when you take that even though it was addressed to that community, it's still applicable to all. So the Christian that doesn't know this context, it doesn't matter because it truly is applicable to all. You don't have to understand the historical context to know that this applies to every Christian, right?
Well, the thing is, ultimately what was going on in that church was, in essence, a pissing contest between different factions. Each of them were claiming to be more worthy, closer to God. They knew God, the others didn't. This kind of thing. Basically, for all intents and purposes, what this portion of Romans, the initial portion of Romans, is really preaching against is people running around like G-men, yet claiming that these people are and aren't real Christians. And that's the irony of it.
What do you think?
Okay, but Lindsay, can I ask you a question?
Oh.
Mark Anthony was claiming me, Nate, Fiona, Epi aren't real Christians because, according to him, we aren't following the entire Bible. Now, that's a fallacy because again, a Christian is just somebody who follows Jesus Christ. What again? There may be a more of that people cannot, but I would say that is because then that includes people who are atheists and are Christians. Like, for example, people who are Marcionites or people who are esoterics. What?
That's covered in a different portion of the Bible.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that Christian is just somebody who follows the teachings of Christ. It isn't somebody who necessarily believes every word of the Bible is literally or woodenly true, because that's really a fallacy to my thinking. Because it's like me saying, as an atheist, it's the same sort of argument as somebody who's a Christian saying to an atheist, well, as an atheist, you have to believe there's no such thing as morals, or there's no such thing as good or bad. Now, I could give you a reason why I think atheists don't believe in good or bad, but again, then you can say, well,
off track here.
No, I'm just.
Rein it in.
I'm trying to rein it in for you. My point is that the point Mark Anthony was making is fallacious because again he's saying that because me, Nate, and Fiona and Epi don't take every word of the Bible literally true. Therefore we're not Christians. That's my point.
That's not his only problem with his argument. I mean, his key term in his argument, Bible, is ambiguous. I asked him which Bible, and he just didn't answer. Whichever one you believe in, he said.
But even then, when you go to certain segments of the Christian, to the text, rather, what it's saying in a lot of areas is, as this book speaks to you, this is how you shall believe, kind of thing. This notion that, it's a personal relationship, as you always hear from the Christians. This means that you have your personal understanding of it, and this is part of where the whole thing really seems to fall down. Is that in terms of G-Man's argument that, oh, this one's a true Christian and this one isn't, or what? Basically, G-Man's the only true Christian, it seems to be in his mindset. But the moment you start saying these ones are and these ones aren't, and arguing over these stupid little bits, that's when, this is the core of it. Everything outside of that, just stop it and stop pretending. And this is where we go to Romans, that we all know, meaning the Christians, all know God. They all have this knowledge there without excuse. And it's saying this knowledge is part of them. And stop sitting there trying to claim that this one's better than that, or you need to believe this instead of that, and da-da-da-da-da. Let the text speak to you. And that's really part of what that core of that message is. And this is what you get from looking at the historical context of why this was written, to what group this was written, what was going on in the church, instead of it just being a bunch of catchy words. So somebody say, see, this line says that everyone knows, so that means the atheist knows, and the Buddhist knows, and the Hindus, and the tribe down in Africa that's never heard of it. No. That's not really what it's trying to say. It's talking about gnosis, this intimate kind of knowledge of the divine, and yeah, it's talking to that community. And also, yes, I will add in, to those that followed, there's a message that they can get out of this. But when it's just a couple words on a page without any context whatsoever, the meaning kind of fades away, doesn't it?
Well, context is important.
Well, I also think we... Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Go ahead.
That's fine. You go ahead, Lee. I've been talking for a while.
Huh?
I said that I've been talking for a while. You go ahead.
Oh, I didn't hear that either. Your volume was just low. But yeah, I think we also do a disservice to ourselves, the theist among us. Because, I happen to be more convinced that Romans 1 is talking that everyone knows there's a God. It's not saying everyone knows the Christian doctrine, but I'm inclined to be more convinced that it's implying that everyone knows there's a God than not. But still, I kind of let that point slide because I've never seen a positive example of that. I've never seen someone use that and be like, to the person opposing Christianity, there's a God. You know it. No, I don't, dude. I'm being honest, and I tell you, you know it. I've never seen that going to a good place. So even though I remain more convinced that's how it is than not, I still kind of gloss over that because I think, it's distracting from our actual purpose, which is to explain our faith and why. So, regardless of whatever else people mess up, like I said, if you believe in Jesus and you put your faith and trust in Him, there you go. You can get pretty much everything else completely wrong. But if you get that right, that's the main point.
Hey, I want to make a quick shadow. I know that a lot of atheists disagree with the interpretation of Romans 1:20 that says that it applies to all people, but I think that I can do a reading of it right now, and then that you're basically going to have to agree with me because you're very, very oriented about context, right? So if you're very, very oriented about context, if you reject the reading I'm about to give you, I'm going to probably throw the inconsistent card, okay? So I'm going to make a New King James reading because I'm not going to read the NIV or something. I'm trying to take a middle road here, New King James, okay? And this starts at Romans chapter 1, verse 18. It's 3 sentences. So, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, okay? Who suppress the truth in their unrighteousness. This is talking about sinners. This is talking about all men. I'm going to read it again. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in their unrighteousness. Because what may be known to God of God.
I'm sorry, hang on. I got to interrupt you for 1 second. Which one was that? Roman 1 what? Just simplify.
I'm on the New King James Version 1, chapter 1, verse 18.
18, okay, thank you, that's all.
Yeah, and I'll just read it real quick. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Right? So it's saying that all of existence, all of creation, is manifested in a way so that all men in their ungodliness and righteousness will be without excuse. It's not talking about Christians, it's talking about all men, right? So what this is basically saying is not that atheists know absolutely that there's a God, right? It's not saying so much that. What it's saying is that when you stand before God and He says to you, I have revealed myself to you in nature, I've revealed to you through existence, I've revealed to you that I exist. You are not going to be without excuse when you say, but it's not going to go that way. So what he is saying is not that you have to admit honestly, because I'm not saying that you honestly know what you believe or don't believe. I'm not saying that you're going to sit there and lie to me about it. But what I am going to say is that it's revealed to you in such a way that you should know, and when you get to that point, you are going to be without excuse, because I do think it's very obvious in nature and existence that there is a God.
Well, let's start with a couple things here. It's revealed from, incidentally, it's not actually the wrath of God, it's actually the indignation when you go back to the actual Greek. And this is revealed from heaven, is what it actually states here. That every unreverence and unjustness of humans, the truth they shall be retaining. And that's 118, the core of it, that this truth is within them. They're retaining this truth. And this is revealed to them through the indignation of God, not the wrath. This is actually going back to the Greek.
Right, but the context is all men, right? God is
Actually,
revealed from the wrath of heaven, the ungodliness and righteousness of men. What does the Greek say right before that line? The ungodliness and righteousness of men.
It's being revealed from heaven on every irreverence and injustice of humans.
Humans, right? So that's all men. It's not saying just the humans in Rome or just the human Gentiles.
But it's being revealed onto the unrighteousness and the irreverence.
Right, and they suppress the truth in their unrighteousness. So what?
Oh, actually, suppressing the truth is where you get the problem, because that's in that particular part they're talking specifically to the people in the church and what's going on there at the time.
I'm saying his first sentence starts out talking to all humans, and then when you get to the next sentence, they're talking about something, you refer back to the previous sentence because that's still the subject they're talking about, unless another subject has been named, which has not been. This is how all languages precurse in this manner. So when you read a sentence and it's talking about all humans, as you've just admitted, and then the very next sentence...
Wait. 121, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not.
That right. So when God has revealed himself through existence, that's in 20, and all beings...
To who?
To all humans.
To the unrighteous.
All humans are unrighteous. Even Christians. All humans are unrighteous. That's Christian Doctrine 101.
But
what I'm trying to say, Shadow, is I'm not trying to force this on you. It's a hard conclusion. It doesn't gel with how you feel in your heart. But what I'm telling you is...
No. This doesn't matter how I feel in my heart. As I said, in discussing this passage, around the time that the whole precept nonsense came up initially, because even with my glance through, taking a look at what I could see in the Greek through interlinears, etc., what they were portraying didn't seem to me, based on the history of what have you, to make sense. So I went and I spoke to roughly a dozen seminaries, people that have been through seminary, as well as a couple Greek linguists, and what I got from them is, no, this is a specific thing for a specific people in a specific time. And in doing that, they're trying to take this out of the context. And this is not saying that some person that lives in some little tribe in the middle of, Saharan Africa or something like that, that has never heard of God or Jesus or any of this other stuff would have this kind of knowledge. The kind of knowledge they're talking about is a deeper gnosis, a deeper knowledge of the divine. Now, what you could infer from this is that everyone has this sense that there's something out there. But whether they'd even know to call it God or what specific God or anything like this, you can't really make the step from point A to point B there. And a lot of this is, well, simply hyperbole as well. He's trying to fire up, and this is the thing that I kept hearing over and over, he was trying to fire up the congregation prior to his arrival.
Yeah, I haven't even pulled like the divine inspiration card or the, I've tried to hit you with, I'm trying to stay on an even keel with you secularly, but you have to admit that while you're listen, Shadow, when you're approaching this, I'm doing you even-handed by not even bringing that stuff up, right? Because then it devolves the conversation, right? But what I'm saying is you're really portraying it through a very, very secular lens, right? Like, so these linguists that you keep bringing up, I'm sure that they're all secularists because their conclusions are secular in nature. So why...
Seamus, I'm sorry, I have to break in with this. Now, Nate knows the games I play quite well by this point. We've danced and sparred before. Now, traditionally in these conversations, I try to play nice, so to speak. I try to get in line as much as I can, and I will oftentimes try to go through the text to try and make it so it's more palatable, so that it's something that can speak to people that are both religious as well as non-religious, so that it's less objectionable. Because if you were to take it with your read, and part of this is, I would rather have what's in there be something that works. Strangely enough, I really would. Now, that may seem counterintuitive to you to some degrees because I'm not a Christian. I'm not religious in any way, shape, and form. But if somebody comes at me and, with the, God exists, or suppressing the truth, or any of this stuff, okay, first off, I tend to present myself as being agnostic. In what does God even mean? What would constitute a God? What would qualify something for that position? Another statement that I make a lot of the time is anyone or anything that's ever claimed to be a God or claimed to speak for one has been lying, and this is my simple view on that. Walking the shamanic path for 20 years, trying to see if there was such a thing, found nothing. I, for the longest time, was going around, and I stopped doing this because atheists were giving me a lot of flack for it, but from the point of gnosis, knowledge, knowing, I know there's no God. Now, I can't prove this, I can't validate this, but I have this intrinsic knowledge that there is no such thing.
Oh, yeah. So do I.
Now, I don't like going that way in these conversations. And part of that is because I know I'm going to get some blowback on both sides because this is gnosis. This is as much as you say, I know God exists, I can say I know it doesn't. And that doesn't lead to good conversation. So the moment somebody says, but this says that everyone knows this, I'm immediately, well, then we can throw out the entire book if you're going to base it on that one thing as being a cornerstone, because I know it doesn't. So at that point, the entire book goes out and the conversation kind of falls flat. So I tried to, in part with the way that I dealt with some of these theologians, etc., is to try and get it to a point that it was more workable and less objectionable. Do you understand that? Does that make sense to you?
Sure it does. Yeah, I would say that oftentimes the strong claims, or however you call it, Gnostic atheism, strong atheism, right, usually can devolve a conversation pretty badly. Okay, and but listen, to me, I love the conversation because and for a second, I would like to kind of eschew into this possible thought experiment that I have that kind of exposes the irrationality in strong atheism, right? So. It's very short and it's very simple and it's like a three-liner and it's very conclusive, right?
Oh, go for it.
So, but the thing is, you must admit that of course you have this feeling and you can't prove it, you can't describe it, but you truly know that there is no God, right? And I mean, this thought experiment pretty much is just going to show that all that can be is basically just a subjective urge that can never be confirmed in your worldview. So although you do know 100%, it boils down to your opinion, right? But I mean, you already know that, but this thought experiment really shows it pretty clearly. Okay, so thought experiment.
I can't agree with that.
Okay, well then I'll run you through a thought experiment, and then
please go. We'll do the thought experiment anyway.
Okay.
But the premise I can't actually agree with.
Sure.
Due to varied circumstances.
You'll get there. You'll get there. Okay, so in the thought experiment, we're going to presuppose absolutely that atheism is true, that absolutely there is no God. We've come here through whatever means which is not important. It could be abiogenesis through evolution through who cares? Atheism is true. There is no God. Okay, so right now we're in the year 2015 now, right? Or not 14, almost 15. So we have Shadow here, right? And he claims that absolutely he knows, right, that there is no God, right?
Absolutely.
Right, that's what the strong atheism claim.
I don't know. It's not.
We'll go with it for now.
Okay.
Well, you're not claiming that you know absolutely?
Well, absolutely, like I'm infallible when it comes to this one belief? No.
Well, that's kind of what the strong claim of atheism.
No. Hang on, Recklin. I just for the record, I basically reject all notions of anything being absolute, but we'll leave that aside. I'm willing to go with it because.
You claim, then I won't even go through the thought experiment because I don't want to straw man.
Hang on. However, I am Gnostic in my belief. Not only do I consider there to be no God, I don't think there can be.
I agree.
Now, there's many a reason for this because I don't think that it is possible for anything to exist that could meet the kind of metric that people try to apply to this God thing. That and the question of what would truly constitute a thing being a God. Not actually being regarded as a God in human terms, but actually being what a God would be. I think that term has become almost entirely meaningless. What would a God be? There is no true answer for this. There's just a bunch of properties ascribed to a thing. But in this regard, from a Gnostic sense, no, I certainly would say that there are no gods, because we can't even quantify what such a thing would even be.
Okay, I'll accept that answer on the basis that God is not testable or repeatable, and if that's your standard, which I'll grant you from your worldview, which is perfectly rational, I think that the purpose of this thought experiment is not even really worthy of going through. If that's you're saying that the only reason I believe there's no God is because it's not testable or repeatable.
That's not my okay. Would you like to play Mystic for a few?
What's that?
Dude, I did the shaman thing for 20 fucking years, man. Want to play Mystic for a few?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not going to put a curse on me or anything, right?
Oh, hush. It doesn't work that way. Never has.
Okay.
Now, over the course of my time walking the shamanic path, I went on a lot of different spirit journeys, and I managed to learn a lot from them. Now, granted, I will qualify for the sake of any atheist to come along, etc., blah, 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 that one of the main teachings that I got from the medicine man that taught me was when I went up to her, they don't delineate, it was a female, and said, you know, when I'm going on these spirit journeys, are the things that I'm experiencing, are these things real or not real? And she said, did you learn something? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, well, does it matter? So just to qualify in that sense, it doesn't matter whether these things are real. It's a matter of the lessons that are learned from them. This is a form of gnosis to a degree. Now, whether you're to say that that knowledge is something that is entirely true or objectively true, what have you, is somewhat irrelevant. The matter is that you learned something, whether it be about your subconscious or your psyche, what have you, through the experience. Now, this was long before I'd considered myself an atheist or even given much thought about it. But what I did learn during this long walk is that every time I created some kind of quasi-theology, it ended up being something that limited me in my, so to speak, spiritual development and trying to come to a greater understanding of what I was experiencing, what I was seeing around me, and what I was learning about not merely this world, but other worlds. We'll just refer to them as. Whether those be psychological constructs or actualize is somewhat irrelevant for the sake of this conversation. So on these journeys, I saw many things. For example, there was one occasion that I saw somebody that identified as being a quote-unquote real person that was also on a journey of their own, that was bowing and scraping and giving great praise to God and all this other stuff. But in front of him, what I saw was a small trickster spirit that was sitting lying on its back and giggling the whole time, because it was amusing itself by trying to convince this person, and apparently it had done so quite well, that it was God. I also came across other entities that through the course of history by varied cultures had been considered gods. Now, if you treated them as such, they'd get very annoyed with you, because they weren't. They didn't consider themselves that way. These are merely titles that were put to people. On another journey, I managed to find my way along a long stream up to a tree, found a small hole in the bottom of the tree, worked my way up there into the top, managed to decipher a bunch of symbols and what have you, and got through into a central chamber where there was a brilliant light that was in the center of a series of columns in a circle. And this brilliant light would sit there and blurt out, well, frankly, nonsense. Just little deepities, much like the little bit of wisdom from the Deepak Chopra quote simulator that was referenced earlier by Sokka before he left. Things that seem to have great meaning but really mean nothing. And there were three people sitting there, which in my mind I identified one as being a Jew, one as being a Christian, and one of them as being a Muslim, all sitting there and going, oh, as it said everything. Now, all this thing was this thing God? No, it wasn't. It was something that was simply leeching off of the faith that was given onto it. Now, that's not what you would call God, nor is it what I would call God. But this thing, in terms of my spirit journeys, is what is receiving the prayers of most. This is what receiving the faith of most. Because it's not going to some grand, wonderful being that's out there, that's the source of all things. It's just being gobbled up by petty little spirits. Now, you come to me and say everybody knows that God exists. And I will tell you that the first thing that comes to mind is that little glowy thing up on the top of that tree that all these people are sitting there going, too, and thinking, you might want to call that God, but I wouldn't. So what would a God actually be? Is there such a thing? Could there be such a thing? Not in my journeys. Not in my travels. What I found when I sat there and tried to get to the proverbial core of all things is I found myself standing alone. And it was kind of sad. Now, in light of all this, if you're to say that I know God exists. Looking back at the time when I was doing the whole spiritual thing, etc., I'd have to say that I know that one doesn't. And that would be the most honest answer. And not for lack of looking.
Well, I want to praise you for sharing that with me, and I mean that honestly because I really kind of want to say something right now, and I think it would be super super valuable for me to say this, but I'm hesitant to do it on air.
Well, let me add one other small thing. On my regular channel, my 13 Heathens channel, there was a video I put out a while ago. And in that video, I posed at the end of it that, now mind you, the classical character of Hasatan is one that their task is to sit there and basically have people question their faith. And whether this ends up strengthening it or what have you, or just simply having them question it. And the concept is some sort of speak so they can come through the other side of the test, hopefully stronger in their faith. And the end of my argument was, if there is some kind of God, it's gone through a lot of trouble to show to me that it doesn't exist. And B, if that's the case, then its purpose for me would be for me to act in the place of the Hasatan, to help people question their faith, they may grow closer in their relationship to God. And I'll ask you to consider that for a moment, and then feel free to ask whatever question you'd like.
Well, it's not so much a question that I was going to ask. I was going to actually share a personal experience with you that I've had on similar lines, and I think it would be valuable for the purpose of this conversation because it's actually we actually come into a very, very intersection here where we really coincide. But I'm hesitant to say it on air for two reasons that I.
If it's personal reasons, don't sweat it, man.
No, it's not personal reasons. Okay, let me just ask you a question. So, I assume, and believe me, I want to tell you that I've had an experience like this myself, without giving too much away. I would assume that some of these experiences were possibly initiated through like ayahuasca or something similar, right? Am I anywhere in the realm of?
Sorry, through what?
An herb.
Oh, no, I never did drugs associated with it. No, it was always through transcendental meditation.
Always through meditation and meditation only.
No
right?
drug influence whatsoever.
Okay. Well, for example, okay. Well, then I'll go through this. So there's so I've watched some documentaries in the past, right? And they are talking about like these tribal people, right? And they're found in multiple places throughout the world, right? And in certain places, specifically like mainly in Central and South America, they do these shamanistic rituals, and they're not like, I don't consider them satanic or anything. I find them really interesting, and they use this the root of a plant that's basically called ayahuasca, and it contains this type of psychedelic substance, right? And it's an extract called DMT or dimethyltryptamine, and it's a close relative to what's in the shrooms, but it's way more potent. And they will use this to induce these spiritual experiences, right? And most people looking in would just be like, wow, these people are on drugs, these experiences have no value. But in my watching these documentaries, I've come to accept that these experiences, even though drug-induced, are valid, right? So in some of these testimonies I've heard, they've come to similar conclusions, okay? And I think they're very, very interesting and kind of valuable. And the only reason I was asking you that is because we might even be able to go down a deeper road if that's kind of what you were talking about, because I'm a little bit more knowledgeable in that area. But if it was just through meditation and everything, then I'm actually even more interested, and I just want to hear more.
Never needed or required the drug. To put it back into the context, as it presented to me by the old shaman, I'm a child of the moon, because my guide was the wolf. The wolf is a spiritual teacher. And as such, I just had a natural talent for being able to do these things in terms of spiritual journeys and this kind of stuff. Now, I don't really walk that path these days, and I'm able to explain a good portion of my experiences and how it can manifest and how it can be explained through various means. But as far as it goes with the experience, As for whether a thing is real or not, or true or not, I tend to go to the psychology of Carl Jung, because he made statements. For example, one that I'm always citing was actually out of a documentary in which his secretary, or receptionist rather, referenced in a point at which he came by the office and he smiled and he said, "Oh, I had a wonderful night last night. I was on the moon." I wasn't saying he was literally on the moon. He dreamt he was on the moon. But experientially, it was something that happened. Now, whether it's something that truly happened in reality or not is irrelevant to the experiential portion of it, because our existence is both tangible as well as experiential. And our experiences may not necessarily coincide with reality at all times, but they still are a part of who we are.
I agree. I agree with you there.
Now, in the case of myself, I went and I did my little journeys things, and I learned things from them. And there was a lot that was interesting and fascinating and this and that. And there's a lot of conclusions that I drew. Now, I say drew past tense, because what would happen is, as I said, I'd build what I refer to it now as quasi-theologies, frameworks that I would construct to try and help myself understand what I was perceiving and what was going on around me during these journeys. We'll just refer to them as. And every time I built one of these frameworks, I'd reach a point that I realized and came to understand that the framework was in the way of me progressing any further. And I'd tear it down and I'd build a new framework. And it wasn't until I realized that I had to throw out all of these notions of, I almost want to jokingly refer to it as the notions of, gods and this and that, and this is the rule and this is the way things are. All these preconceived notions, I'd have to throw them away. And it wasn't until I decided to step beyond them and say, okay, there are some things that are understood, that perhaps must be understood. Things that simply are as they are. And once I accepted that, I got to my proverbial destination and said, okay, I get it. Now, are there still unknowns? Certainly, as there should be. But at the same point, I got a pretty good handle on things. And that was kind of the point at which I stopped, because I got what I was looking for. And what I was looking for, that's private.
That's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing that with me. That's really profound. And I think that
the thing is, though, whenever I get into this, I feel like I'm discounting the faith of others, and I don't like going into these conversations with that, because at a point it turns into basically what I'm doing right now, which is it sounds like I'm giving a lecture.
No, I'm actually really interested in this, and it's given me it's given me, put it this way, out of all the time that I've spent on G+ in the last 2 months, I feel like as if I understand you and where you're at and all of this way better than anyone else I've ever encountered, atheistic-wise, right, that doesn't share the Christian faith with me. And it's to a point where earlier I wanted to drop a thought experiment on you, and I wanted to try to, but now I realize that this is, for most people that I come in contact with, that's for them. This is not for you. What I'm saying is I tailor my approach to people in different ways. And the approach that I would use on you is basically a laissez-faire approach, because I truly believe that what you have found is truth and it is genuine, and I'm not willing to guide you away from that, right?
And that's the thing is, I think that a faith, any faith that is not explored, is a faith that does not have merit. And I think that it's important for everyone to explore that. Now, what the answers they come to, that's for them to find. It's not for me to tell them. It's not for me to guide them. But I think it's important to encourage them to find their own answers instead of just relying on somebody else's answers. Years and years ago, I was actually back in the old BBS days, which I know dates how long I've been at this crap. You may not even know what a BBS is, hell. But this is a predecessor of the internet, and it was one of the earliest kinds of forums that were out there. And I was put in charge of a forum, and there was an uproar because, oh no, somebody that, is an atheist and doesn't have any beliefs and blah, 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 they're in charge of the forum. And I'm like, hey guys, come on, man, relax. And well, what do you believe in? And I said, okay, fine. And I gave this long dissertation, and a couple of the people that had read it came back to me and they said, that's really fascinating. We want to know more. And I said, well, good for you. Those are my beliefs. Go find your own. And I still kind of look at things that way, that people need to figure out what it is to them. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I mean, if there is some kind of God thing, I think it would take all the believers and unbelievers alike working together to figure out what the heck it is.
Right, I agree. I definitely would agree with you there.
I mean, nobody has all the answers. Nobody can. You can just find out what seems right to you and then go from there. Not exactly what you'd expect from an atheist, I suppose, though.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You're not the typical Right. Yeah. I wouldn't even. I feel more that I would gain more from you just listening to you more. But like I said, I agree with you in the fact that people need to find their own spiritual journey and not rely so much on other people to bring them to some pre-drawn conclusion that they have. I think that all things need to be examined for themselves spiritually as well. And if you're too heavily reliant on someone else to bring you to a spiritual conclusion, then that's wrong, and it's for you to decide. So, and I agree with you there.
Oh yeah, but the thing is, I have plenty of my own opinions as well. And if I were to come into these kind of discussions and start telling Christians that I thought that their theology was on a spiritual level very primitive or something like this, I'd be immediately pissing everyone off. Which is, I have to, and I cite that in part in jest because of all the times that people have come to me and tried to tell me that you can't be, spiritual unless you're a Christian, and I'm like, what? What? I'm sure you know the passage I'm referencing. That was a very bad paraphrase.
No, I understand completely, and I think is a lot of information to be gained spiritually, and yeah, it's not that path isn't always going to bring you to Christ or some pre-drawn conclusion. I mean, it just may bring you a better understanding of who you are or existence, or just what this all is. Or I mean, it could literally be anything. And believe me, as an atheist, I was an atheist for 25 years, my whole life before I come to Christ. I've only been a Christian for like 3 years, and I had my own ways of justifying, reality around me and the conclusions that I were to make of it. And I had my own views of my place in the universe and what would eventually happen to me. And I drew a lot from Carl Sagan and, more got into cosmology. And back then when I was an atheist, just simply I used to think that, I'm going to die, and it's going to be pretty much exactly like it was before I was born. It's going to be zapped. At that time, I mean, I don't remember, this universe. It seems to me my matter has always been a part of this universe, right? And if this universe truly is 14 billion years old, then my matter has always been around for that, and my consciousness of it has only been the last 30 years, right? So I've got 14 billion unaccounted years of this matter, and then it seems like when I die, I'm going to have a lot more time of unaccountedness of this matter. But I didn't look at that in a sad way. I looked at that in a grand way, that I might not be conscious, or I might be, who knows, but what I will be is still always a part of this universe, right? And that gave me some type of satisfaction. And I think that spiritually, that gave me, that put me at ease. But, since then I've come to a whole another conclusion that I'm more firmer in. And I still believe similar things that I held then, but I mean, yeah, I think everyone has their own spiritual conclusions, and they need to examine.
There are times that I think that that the people that are believers in whether it be God or whatever word they want to try to ascribe to it, whether they be a theist, a deist, a pantheist, a panentheist, or 1,000 other permutations, regardless of what word they might want to do it. Anyone that has this kind of spiritual sense that sits there and tries to discount science is really missing out. Especially when you get to like the young earth creationists and this kind of stuff that, poof, there it is, and they're not really looking at the grandeur and the intricacy of the processes involved with this. And if you do believe in some kind of divine force that could be a guiding force or what have you, it makes for a much more beautiful and elegant manner of creation than just, blink, there it is. I really feel like they're missing out on something.
Right, I agree, and I generally don't hold to the young Earth creationist model because, but I do it. I don't do it for such grandiose reasons as that. I just usually follow a scholarly consensus, and I don't really care enough to do any research into it. But when I was an atheist, I used to do a lot of surface level layman's cosmological like research, and I'm still fascinated by this to this day, and I've got like all of Carl Sagan's Cosmos series on my computer, and I'm a big fan of his, and I love learning about stuff like that, and it really fascinates me to probably the most degree, because as an atheist, to me that was finding God, finding out about how we got here, the existence, the Big Bang, and all of these cosmological things. It just seemed like the ultimate truth to me, and I still hold it in the utmost.
I mean, I'll sit there and I would get in conversations with my wife at times, and I'd talk with her about whether it be evolution or this and that, and she, as a believer, doesn't sit there and say, no, God did this, God did that. She just says, wow, isn't it cool how God did it? And, that's something I can respect. I don't have to agree with her, but I can certainly respect it. Anyway, we've been running for a little bit of a while. I should wrap this out at some point. Hi, Hal. So sorry I've been kind of sitting here squawking the whole time and you haven't gotten a word in edgewise.
No, I've just been listening and typing inside chat with people.
Yeah. But I want to close out in a couple seconds, but I'm going to close out with something a little bit different. Shamos, you mind if I put you on the spot and ask you something that could be seen as a leading question?
Sure. I thank you for the warning.
No, don't worry. I'm more than fair to be honest on this one. Now, when I'm playing with Nate, I'll sit there and try to lead him towards drop breadcrumbs to lead him towards the conclusion. But he knows the game. I'm not going to play that with you because that would be unfair. You haven't gotten used to the game yet. But in terms, because you said you were an atheist for the majority of your life, and then you converted towards Christianity, the urge, so to speak, the desire to start converting towards something. Was this in part due to a sense of what I'm going to refer to as the other? That there's something out there, whether you want to describe it to being a consciousness or a subconsciousness or however you want to try and parse that out in your own mind. But was it the sense of this connectedness with something that you couldn't really define? And part of the outreach for religion was to try and figure out what it was and what it may mean to you.
Actually, it's kind of funny. I'm 29 now, so I spent the first 25 years as an atheist, and then I spent 2 years as just a theist. I came to a conclusion within my atheism that there was a God. And what the funny part about it is Carl Sagan and my endeavors with cosmology brought me to that conclusion. And it's not... it's subjective. That conclusion was made subjectively in nature. So when I first, my spiritual journey, it wasn't even that I was searching at first. It's just that I had done some research and I had made a subjective conclusion. And the subjective conclusion was that basically how I put it, and it's not very eloquent, but I just put it this way. In my experiences and how I feel, I do not think it's possible for life to come from non-life. And I looked at all of the information around me, cosmology-wise, and just said that in this type of complexity, it seems to me that there is an intelligence behind this that I do not know what to quantify, and I do not even know if it could even be deemed as intelligence in the way that we perceive it. But I believe that whatever it was not natural. And I stayed that way for 2 years, and I never explored it, never gave a crap, never nothing. That's what happened. And then after that 2-year period is when I started my spiritual journey for very strange reasons that weren't. It's kind of difficult to explain, but yeah, it was 2 years after that I actually started looking for who might this God be in a personal sense.
Now, for anyone that may be watching this, you will note that I am not doing the usual thing and jumping up and down and trying to explain how things might have been or trying to call them out or this and that, because it's not that kind of talk. Sometimes it's worthwhile, I feel at least, to simply enjoy the journey, so to speak, see where the conversation goes without having to be argumentative and what have you. And really part, I think, of trying to understand others is to try to understand the framework or the lens through which they see the world around them. Now, you'll run across a lot of people that do feel this sense of the proverbial other, as I was referencing earlier. Now, generally, this will lead to, very different beliefs, a lot of them based on culture or what you're typically exposed to or what resonates with them or what have you. And I'm personally am not one to fault people for having this sense of this proverbial other, whether you want to call it God or something else, and trying to figure out what it is. And frankly, from the answer that was just given by Shamos, I really respect his honesty in this because, yes, he's putting the word God to it, but he also has a little bit of that agnosticism in there, that questioning, that still searching, that this is where I am now. And I don't see him lockstep with a lot of the kind of believers that I tend to run into here. And I think that's something that we should respect because it's part of a journey. It's not somebody just sticking a flag in the middle of the road and declaring that they claim this land in the name of Jesus or France or whatever ideology. And on that note, if you don't mind, I'm going to see about closing out the hangout, but I'm going to do closing comments, and I'm going to let Halsoy say anything if he has anything to say, and then we'll go to Shamos, and I'm going to give him the last word. Halsoy.
Nothing further. I just enjoyed sitting in. I was bored out of my mind, so pleasant to be in, decent company, not surrounded by buffoons.
Cool, man. Shamos.
Sure, I'll just keep it simple. I just want to thank you guys for having me. I really had a great discussion and learned a lot of things, and I just want to close it out with Jesus Christ is Lord. Thank you.
Thanks, man, and have yourself a great day, Shamos. And to those of you that watch, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.